Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Storytime episode. Just in case you've never watched one of these and you have no idea what it is, we are going to be doing a Star Wars tabletop RPG series where we're actually like playing a Star Wars tabletop game. And all of these story times are basically the events leading up to when we start the series. So we've been playing before, and we want to make our game into a series. And in order to catch everybody up as we're preparing for that, we do these little story times where I tell you what the players have done and the story thus far. Now, it's been a while since we've done one of these, and that's because last time we did one, I said that we would do Dathomir like as one episode or possibly 2 episodes. Well, get ready for a long one because we're going to go over everything that happened in Dathomir. And the reason why it's been so long is I was expecting Dathomir to take maybe 2 weeks total. Ended up taking like 4 different weeks of playing on Dathomir, if not 5. I'm pretty sure it was 4 though. And then in between all of that, you had several players just not being able to make it, so we didn't play. Like, I'm okay typically, and this is kind of a good tip if you're playing, and maybe you're a GM or something. I tend to be okay if like one player can't make it, and then the GM just fills in for that player, and you kind of catch them up later. The times that I'm not is when it pertains to that character and their story, and you're kind of doing their story. So like, let's say we had 6-pounder playing as Doc, and we were going to change his character to a Jedi like we do on Dathomir, and we'll go into that, and he's not going to be there for that, then we just don't play, right? We gotta make sure he's there. And what this has led to is us realizing again that we need to change the night that we're going to be playing on, because one, it doesn't work for the show. Like, we want the series to be on a night, because it's going to be live streamed, that people can watch and it won't conflict with other massive shows going on. And then the second part of that is we just are having these issues where like people are going out of town, or big events come up, and it's just normal stuff like that. So we're gonna change our night, and we'll let you guys know what night the show will be on, and if that will ever change in the future. But with that being said, we did do all of Dathomir finally. So the last time we left off, our heroes, our players, were still on Ord Mantell, and they were getting ready to go to Dathomir. And they had one final idea before they left, which is to go and find Iva Vizsla, which is the leader of the Death Watch. And they've talked to her before, and they talked to her when I told you about that in the last episode, or basically telling her that they found these secret tunnels and entrances to these tunnels in Ord Mantell, and they're underground, and they think that someone is trying to infiltrate Ord Mantell or take it over or something. And basically, they try to you connect it with the Knight Brothers, which is another faction within the Shadow Collective. So you have the Death Watch, the Knight Brothers are 2 of them, and they're going kind of against each other here. And Iva basically tells them like, good, no, that's cool. Like, if you want to put them up on the chopping block, that's great, because as a leader of the Death Watch, she wants all the power that the Knight Brothers have. And she wants to be the leader of the Shadow Collective. So, of course, she's going to investigate what's going on there, but only as much as it's going to, make her position more prominent within the Shadow Collective. So they kind of get that vibe from her, but they wanted to go to her one last time and be like, please promise that you'll investigate this while we're gone. And that's going to play a big part in what happens in the future. They haven't gotten to that part yet, but they certainly did get her to promise to investigate it, and she likely will. She is a woman of her word, and she will go and investigate what's going on there. But with that, the players left the planet. They had put a tracker on their previous bounty, because the bounties have been ending up dead when they turn them in. So they put a tracker on this guy named Wolf Diedrich, and then they left the planet and headed to Dathomir. And as they were getting ready to make their hyperspace jump, the tracker showed that the person was in orbit around the planet, and then nothing. There was nothing on the tracker. It's like, okay, so they could presume that whatever happened, they went into hyperspace. But the thing with that is, all of their previous bounties were ending up dead on the planet. So it's a good sign that the guy's not dead yet. You know, he's obviously, or he might be dead and his body is on a ship. Who knows? They just presume that he has gone into hyperspace. So with that, they went to Dathomir. The trip over there was pretty standard. There was nothing that happened. It's about a 3-day trip from Ord Mantell to Dathomir, and they arrive in orbit and they see this very red planet. Now, if you watched Clone Wars, you kind of know where I got a lot of the inspiration here. Dathomir is the home to the Night Sisters, and the Night Brothers happen to be on there. So basically, the Dathomirian natives are these women called the Night Sisters, and people who migrated there over time are some Zabrak dudes that they call the Night Brothers. And the Night Brothers actually are in a weird servitude state to the Night Sisters. And the planet itself is very red, and all of the vegetation on it has got this red or purple hue because of the star. The star is a giant, like, uranium-filled star that makes everything kind of have this red pigment on this planet. But they go down onto the planet and they find a very swampy planet, because that's what Dathomir is. It's very spoopy. They didn't really have a good spot to land, so they had to land pretty, and they wanted to do this very stealthily. So they landed pretty far away in like the southeast of where all of these like landmarks are that they saw from orbit. But basically what they saw were a couple primitive camps, one to pretty much the direct west of them and one to the northwest, quite a ways. And then directly north of their landing spot was some kind of like strange mountain with ruins around it, and it looks like the ruins led into the mountain. And what that was is it's actually the Night Sister stronghold. So it's where you see most of the Night Sister stuff during the Clone Wars series, if you guys watch that, which I would suggest, because I actually hadn't watched much Clone Wars, and then I went and wanted to do research for Dathomir, so I went and watched the entire story arc that involved Dathomir, and it turns out it was pretty good. I did enjoy it, but I did get a lot of inspiration, I would say, out of watching that. So you have the Night Sister Fortress to the north, and then they land. Now, Gand, their bounty hunter, is a findsman. He's kind of like a tracker. He has a lot of survival skills, and he removes black dice on like tracking, which is good because they were going to have a lot of black dice on here, and survival skills they needed to have because, you know, they're in the middle of a swamp. There is no civilization on Dathomir. It's a very primitive planet, despite the fact that, you know, there were many wars that happened. And in the Clone Wars era, there was a pretty massive battle that ended up happening, a couple of them, in fact, where there was probably hundreds, if not upwards of close to 1,000 Night Sisters killed during these battles, and Night Brothers, in fact. So the civilization was left on the brink of extinction. And in fact, in the Clone Wars series, it kind of shows that, like, yeah, most of the Night Sisters, if not all of them, were killed, and so were the Night Brothers. But at the end of that, you know, you can kind of presume that it's a giant planet. There's probably quite a few of them left. So I had to basically, you know, take my own route with this and just assume what would happen, you know, these many years down the line, because that was during the Clone Wars. We had the entire original trilogy happen, and now we're in A New Hope, or not A New Hope, A Force Awakens. So basically, there's been a lot of time to reestablish what was there. So yeah, there are camps of Night Brothers that have, you know, reconvened, and Night Sisters are back at the forefront. There's not as much of them as they were before, but they are there, and someone is obviously in charge. So, you know, they have this primitive planet that they're trying to scout out on, and what they're trying to find is there's a couple routes that have left them to believe that they have information, or that Dathomir will have information on, you know, what the heck is going on in Ord Mantell. The first of which is more of a personal one. So Caitlin, the Huntsmaster's like secretary, and a person they found out is actually quite a badass. Her sister, who she presumed was dead, but was originally captured as a slave on Dathomir when she and her fellow family members, called the Saphira Hunters, were hunting a Tarentatech, which is basically a mutated Rancor. Mutated by the dark side of the Force in weird like experiments, and because Rancors are native to Dathomir, you can assume that there might be a Tarentatech or two on Dathomir. So yeah, they go and they try to hunt these down, and in that hunt, they got ambushed by something and got taken into slavery. And then you see that Lily, Caitlyn's sister, is sold into slavery and then goes to Ord Mantell. So that was kind of like they're trying to track any trace of her down that Caitlyn may have missed. So that's one reason they're on Dathomir. The other is that the Knight brothers, who are part of the Shadow Collective, have been really fishy lately. Something's going on there. So they're trying to get to the bottom of this, and maybe there is some information on Dathomir because the leader of the Knight brothers, Vakran, has gone back to Dathomir for whatever reason. So they're kind of looking into that. But they do arrive on the planet. They're in the swamp, so they set off. And what ends up happening is Gand, and this was completely unplanned. Like I had like 4 or 5 different encounters that could happen depending on where they went or what happened, and I kind of set these aside. And this is like a good GM tip to give to you guys. You kind of make encounters that could happen. You set them aside as kind of generic stuff that they may encounter. And I had battle maps planned for all of it as well. And what I did is I just kind of went with them, and Gand literally straight up said like, "Hey, are there any like game trails? Are there any tracks from animals that I could see?" And I'm thinking like, okay, well, I wasn't expecting that, but yeah, go ahead and make a roll. So he does, and he succeeds. And what he ends up finding through that is, yeah, there's some tracks of what look like humanoids. And then there's some game trails. So there's kind of like a smaller animal, a medium animal, and like larger animal game trails. And what they decide to do is go with the larger game trail and follow that kind of to their destination, because they're assuming that because it's a large game trail, there won't be a ton of things that'll jump out and attack it. Like people will avoid that kind of thing, which is smart because it's a large game trail. And what they end up finding going down this is one of my random encounters that I had ready just in case, which was a Rancor. So they all are pretty bad with their perception checks upon coming across this. So they don't actually see the sleeping baby. I want to stress that it is a baby Rancor, which is still a big Rancor, just like sleeping in its little tiny den on like this mound. And because it's very foggy and swampy, one of the players just assumes it's a rock, and they start walking up, and someone gets the suspicion like something's not quite right. So they make another kind of like survival check, and right as they do that, one of the players is like getting ready to lean against this so-called rock, and they manage to warn the player. But at that point, it's done. The Rancor has been engaged. He hears them. He wakes up and he turns around, and the fight is on. And that actually that fight took about an hour to do. I was actually a little surprised. There was a lot of strategic stuff that the players were trying to do. In fact, a couple of the players almost died, and a lot of that is due to I gave the Rancor, it's like a swipe attack is a swipe, so it definitely cleaves in front of him. So the Rancor hit quite a few of the players a couple times, and they kind of figured out like, okay, well, we should face this thing away if we can, whoever's kind of got its attention, and they managed to do so. But the thing is really big, so it's hard to move around. And they did manage to take it down, but not without getting really low on HP. And they're still like an hour away from this camp they wanted to sneak up on the west. So basically, they landed in the southeast and they went directly west, following this massive game trail. And they kind of learned their lesson from that. But what I learned is that it worked out really well for me because I had like a Rancor, I had, a couple Knight Brothers scouts that they might fight, and I just had like all this stuff. There's like these large birds called the Vika birds on Dathomir. So like maybe they would come across a nest of those and fight them. And there's these kind of like alligator lizard things that, that was like the medium game trail. Like if they had gone down that, I might have had them fight that. There's all sorts of large insects. So like I had all these planned, and the fact that they chose to go down the large game trail, I was like, okay, well, I guess in my head, I'm like, I guess you guys are fighting the Rancor then. Like that's what you have chosen to do. And it worked out really well for me. If they had not done that, I may have just kind of figured a way to throw one of those in. Like, yeah, we're going to sneak around and try to stay as close to the camp as possible. Then they might have found the scouts or something. But they are low on HP and we're towards the end of our session. And it worked out really well because I was like, okay, we'll make a survival check to see if you can find a place to rest. And in fact, to the north of where they're at, they kind of like bring up a pretty rough version of the map by contacting their AI on their ship, which that's an entire different thing entirely. We'll talk about that eventually, but they do find a cave system up in the north that they can kind of get to fairly quickly. So they make their way there and they set up camp. And as they're setting up camp, they see this like cave entrance, and basically they're setting up what's called a bolma, which is it's a type of shelter that is used primitively and often is used in places like Africa, where you take like these thorn bushes and you put them in like a circle or a semicircle based on where you're at. They were putting it in a semicircle around this cave entrance, and they're setting all that up and getting ready for that when Doc notices there is a man at the entrance to the cave. And he's actually leaning against the wall and he looks injured, and he makes eye contact with Doc and like mouths the words like, help me. And Doc is kind of like, okay, well, he's very wary about it, and he kind of looks around, and some of the other players notice this man as well, and the guy is looking straight at Doc, and Doc is very wary of it. The other players are like, no, just go, man. He's clearly injured. Just like go see what's going on. And Doc very warily sneaks over to him, and it's probably for good reason that he should be suspicious of this, because as soon as he walks into the cave, the body turns to ash and blows away in the wind. And he looks towards the rest of the party. And there was this clever little thing I did when they landed on Dathomir, which is they found like this kind of like hummingbird, but it's a bug, and its wings flip so fast that you can't even see them, but it is very hummingbird-esque. And they had saw that when they landed, and they were like, oh, hell no, there's some big bugs around here. So they were like, nope, nope to the bugs. Well, as the body blows away and Doc, which is 6-pounder, looks outside of the cave to the rest of the party to be like, what the hell? He sees the rest of the party frozen, like in time, like they aren't moving. But then he looks up and sees one of the bugs that they saw earlier, also frozen in time, and you can see the wings very slowly like going up and down. So he manages to derive the fact that, oh, it's not like he is stuck in time, it's not like time has stopped, it's that time is moving very, very slowly. And it's at that point that he hears a voice in his head calling him to come into the cave, and he's addressed by name. It says like, Doc Tala, like, if I feel you seek power, come and see me. And he kind of looks down in the cave, he looks back at the party members, and he just shrugs and goes, all right. So he goes into the cave because his character does seek power. His character seeks recognition on his family. Like, his family doesn't believe in him, and he wants to prove them wrong. And if something is offering him power, he's going to go do it. And early on in the campaign, we made him an explorer. Was it a colonist? I think it was an explorer. It was one of those two. I'll look it up as we're continuing to discuss, because it was one of those classes where it comes in the Edge of the Empire stuff, right? It's like it's a basic class in Edge of the Empire, but they didn't have Force users. Yeah, he was a colonist doctor. So they don't have Force users in the Edge of the Empire stuff. And that's fine because, it's the Edge of the Empire. You're dealing with smugglers and thieves and stuff like that, bounty hunters. But early on in the campaign, Doc learned that he had some kind of Force power going on, and that he wanted to expand upon that. And what we learned when we were playing over and over is that Doc felt kind of useless. He didn't like his character so much. Not that he wasn't having fun, he was having fun, but he wanted to change up his character a bit. So him and I agreed that we would change it up. And this is how we did it. So he goes in, he's, going down this cave, he's beckoned in, and what he, after a couple minutes of going down this cave, what he sees is this large chamber, probably, like 40 feet wide and about 80 feet deep. And towards the end of the chamber, about, a third of the way in or 2/3 of the way in, it kind of dips down, and then there's water, and it's this green, like fluorescent water kind of just pulsating like in this cave here, and the cave tapers off down into the water as well. So you have this like pool, and he goes over to the pool and he looks into it and sees nothing. Like the water, while it's glowing and is green, is very dark. So whatever it is, it's very deep of what he's looking into. And then all of a sudden he sees a large figure swim by, but pretty low into the water. So whatever it is, it's really huge. And then it comes back up and he sees just pretty much an eye. Like whatever this creature is, it's so big that by the time it gets to kind of the surface of this water, all he's seeing is this eye of this creature. And what it is it's called the Sleeper. And I did take this from Clone Wars as well. So it's kind of all part of the Dathomir story, where there's this large creature, and the way that it's described in the wiki I think is hilarious. It's got like 2 like claws for arms on the front, and then it's 2 like hind legs or tentacles, and it's this huge carapace like around the entire thing, and it's got these large eyes, and it's a force of power. It's a force of the Force. The Force actually flows through this thing, and it is how the Night Sisters get their powers as well, because they're not considered Jedi or Sith. They're considered witches. They have what are called like magics as opposed to Force using. They're all fairly similar, and they kind of derive from the same thing, but it is different. And they get their powers from the Sleeper, which is what this big thing is. And it has called to Doc. It has felt his presence on the planet, a presence he hasn't felt in a very long time. So the Sleeper calls to him. And it was funny because he keeps referring to preparing Doc for the feast. And Doc is like, that doesn't sound good, bro. And it's true, it doesn't. Like it wasn't going to be good, because the idea here was that the Sleeper was going to try to unleash the power of Doc to really kind of like get the Force flowing through him and then eat him. Like that was the entire plan here, but he didn't know that. So as I flip through my notes, yeah, it's good. I actually have I do take hand notes. I've mentioned this before, but it's how I do everything. So I need to get to his stuff in particular, because he is in a Vergence. A Vergence is a very powerful place of power in the Star Wars universe. It's a place of where the Force kind of meets the physical world, you might say. And this Vergence I named the Wellspring of Life, where this water, because these waters on Dathomir, like the green glowy liquid, actually has some kind of healing property to it. It's restorative. So this well kind of leads down into whatever underwater cavern this creature called the Sleeper lives in, and his power flows through the water. Maybe he gets his power from the water, it's unknown, but Doc is in this place called the Wellspring of Life, and this thing called the Sleeper has offered him great power. And how we did this is I could have just gone through character creation again with 6, and we could have had his character and have been done with it. But I wanted to give him a narrative reason for his character to suddenly be a Jedi, because we changed his character from a colonist to a consular from the Force and Destiny rule set. And it needed to make sense for him, for his character to be that way. So I came up with this really cool narrative thing where he's talking to the Sleeper, and the Sleeper basically asks like, hey, do you want this power? And Doc is kind of hesitant, but he says like, yeah, no, I do. I definitely do. And instantly he gets knocked out, basically. Like there's a little pool of water, he drinks from it, gets knocked out. The Sleeper puts him to sleep. It makes sense. And then in this weird lucid state, he has this dream where he sees this pool. He sees several pools in front of him. And when he peers into the water, like he sees these visions, and he gets these 3 visions. And basically, when you're creating a character in the Star Wars rule set, you have to choose especially when it boils down to the Jedi classes, you have to get morality set. But you also have things like motivations and, just general stat configurations of your character. So, we did the motivation first. In the pools, he saw 3 visions. The first vision was that of his parents when he was a younger child, and his vision shows him outside, but his parents on the inside. And it's great because I could totally make any of this up. And that's his lore for his parents now. His parents are debating selling him into slavery because they want more money. And remember, they're on Ryloth. Like, slavery at the time of him being a child is still very prevalent, and they want more money to buy spice. They are basically druggies at that point in his life, and they're debating selling their own son because to them he's just a money bag for spice. They don't end up doing it, but Doc sees this exchange in his first vision, and that is the vision of revenge. Like, that was going to be one of his motivations. The second one is he sees all of these slaves on this planet. There's like a huge trench dug into the core of this planet, and it goes pretty much as far as the eye can see. And he sees, like, it's a snowy planet. He sees all these slaves working away tirelessly, just working in this trench, building things, moving pieces. And, there's droids helping him out, but they're slave masters. And these slaves are like being worked to death there. And that's what he sees in that vision. That motivation would be that of freedom. And I'll discuss these in a moment. But the last one, as I flip through my notes again, was he saw Poe, which they have met. They've met Poe and BB-8, which is really fun. They saw Poe and BB-8 loading into an X-Wing. The X-Wing takes goes up into like low atmosphere. And as soon as it does that and like kind of breaches this mountain range, you see a massive land battle happening between, 2 different factions, which he recognizes as the Resistance and the First Order. And then he sees, basically this X-Wing head into the fray where there's also a massive air battle happening. So those were his 3 motivations, which are the revenge, the freedom, or the resistance. And by choosing one of those, that kind of sets up his character. He chose freedom. So his motivation now is to free all slaves. Like, growing up on Ryloth, he doesn't want to see that happen. He doesn't want to see slavery. He wants that abolished. So his motivation now is to free any slave that he can. And then we get into the morality, and the morality thing was really fun because basically I set up a scenario, which is a scenario that is actually going to happen on Dathomir, and he has to kind of choose through these things. And what he sees is this cavern, and suddenly, he's within this cavern, and in front of him is kind of this feral Wookiee. It's a large Wookiee that looks feral but not dead. And then he looks to his left and to his right, and on the ground are these Wookiees that are dead, and they begin to rise behind him, and they surround him. And then behind the feral Wookiee is this woman who is like cackling, and he has to kind of make the choice. So he turns, he kills the 3 like zombies, or what they are, of Wookiees. And by the way, those actually exist. And then he turns and he knocks out. So he basically subdues the feral Wookiee. And then he goes over to this woman and kills this woman. And behind her are these like vials. And what is really interesting to me is what I set up was these vials are, one of them is going to be the cure and the others are not. So how he goes about doing this is very interesting. But there's a blue one, a red one, a green one, a purple one, and then there's a clear vial, which he, being a doctor, surmises is whatever liquid he needs to mix with one of these, and that'll be the cure. And just based on his perception check and kind of seeing and investigating the bodies of the zombies and the unconscious feral body, he demises that, or basically reduces the choices down to being like either red or blue. And he figures out that the green vial and the purple vial are probably what caused these Wookiees to be this way. And he kind of has to 50-50 because he failed a roll and he doesn't know which one is right. So he chooses the red one. He thinks the red one is right. He mixes it in because he tests it himself and nothing happens to him, which is really nice. But he mixes it in with the clear one and he goes and gives it to the unconscious Wookiee. And the Wookiee at first wakes up and then perishes and dies, and slowly, like, his breathing stops. And it's like, oh, that's really interesting because the blue one was the correct one indeed, but Doc just wasn't able to save this guy. And what I find interesting is based on his choices here, we came up with his emotional strengths and his emotional weaknesses, his morality. And I got these straight out of the book. Like, these are literally in the book. The first one is compassion. The character cares about the tribulations others face, and wants to help those that he comes across. His compassion may lead to self-sacrifice in order to aid those who need it. So basically, he gained compassion by trying to help the unconscious Wookiee, but also by kind of sacrificing himself in a way by testing one of the vials in this vision. And then mercy. The character shows mercy towards his foes, dealing with them fairly and honorably. He can spare the defenseless. He can spare the defenseless, will help a helpless enemy, and generally does not abuse positions of strength because, he had mercy on this feral Wookiee, knocked him out. And then his emotional weaknesses that came in because he couldn't make a decision, right? He was having a really hard time with that, is fear and weakness. Fear is the line between caution and fear is a thin one. Sometimes the character spends too much time concerned about the potential problems of a situation to act in the situation at all. At other times, his caution causes him to flee when danger presents itself, though bolder action may reap real rewards. And then weaknesses, there's a fine line between showing mercy to one's foes and letting evil fester because one does not want to engage with it. The character may let bad things happen simply because it's too hard to deal with them. So he, in his indecision with choosing one of these in his bad role, he basically came up with the emotional weaknesses of fear and weakness. And I like that. I like how that ended up happening. And then finally, we chose his basic like stat balances, and by doing that, he saw more visions. For instance, being a consular, he gets to choose 3 of these. He can either choose cool, and these are our skills that he can choose ranks in: cool, discipline, knowledge, education, lore, leadership, and negotiation. And he saw different things for all of those. For instance, for cool, he saw himself setting up for a sneak attack. For lore, he saw himself at a library studying the galaxy, so on and so forth. And he chose all these, it worked out well for him. He basically gets to choose 3 of those. He chooses 2 of discipline, knowledge, education, xenology, and medicine. He chose those 2. But he goes through, and then finally, once we were done kind of allocating his stats, and those were all new and different, he had a set of visions before he woke up. Like it was just like an onslaught. It was kind of like Rey's Force vision in The Force Awakens when she touches the lightsaber. It was of that degree, and it was interesting because it started with a small green creature. Right? You could probably guess what this is. This is one of those Yoda creatures. A small green creature with long, pointy ears teaching children how to use the Force and control objects, moving them with their minds, which is something he has not done or seen before. Then he saw, it flashed again, and he saw Venator arguing with the Republic to capture and imprison Darth Raptus and the Dreadlords. So this was like, all goes back to their ancient HK droid, being a part of the Old Republic. He saw visions of that. And then he saw entire planets burning while, it switched to other planets just completely teeming with life. And then he saw the creation of a lightsaber. The lightsaber was kind of building itself slowly, and he was doing it with his mind and the vision. And then it, again, switches real quick, and he sees himself on a ship that he's never seen before, wearing a black officer's uniform, and the rest of the party that he was with, all of the other players were in stormtrooper outfits. And it was really confusing to him because some of the players looked like humans, but he knew that human was Cookie, like Cookie the Wookiee. It's really weird to him. Then he had a vision of him in Ord Mantell confronting the leader of the Shadow Collective, which is Dalton Oswin, which is a person they've met before. He's really dangerous, but they were confronting him. But instead of confronting him, it was a weird little thing. They know that they were confronting him, but it was a woman instead. And again, the vision switches, and he sees himself with Vex and Caitlin and the rest of the party, and they're on a snowy planet, and they're running from a ton of First Order stormtroopers. I have no idea what was happening with that. And then finally, he saw a massive space battle just in space. He couldn't tell which planet it was around. And the Void Ghosts are part of it. So they're inside their ship with their, like little Millennium Falcon ship that they've called the Halcyon. And they're fighting, and then suddenly they take a direct hit, and they hear their ship's AI named Gideon tell everyone to get to escape pods, and then the vision switches and the ship explodes. So he saw all of that, and then suddenly wakes up in like a cold sweat in this cavern, and he feels kind of sick. And he looks at his data pad, which is sitting next to him, and it's been days. It has been days where he's been asleep, and he hasn't eaten, he hasn't had water. So he's kind of groggy, and he doesn't see the eye in the water anymore. So he goes down to the edge of the water, and he takes a drink of it, in order to replenish himself. And as he does so, he feels like his body start to heal and start to come back. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, he sees that figure again coming up through the water. And then the figure tells him like, oh, you are going to be a great feast. And that's when Six just nopes, and he turns around, he starts running, and one of the claws comes up out of the water, and he makes a successful athletics check to dodge it as it like pretty much fills this entire cave and starts kind of clawing at the cave entrance as he just runs up through the cave and manages to get away before like a small little collapse happens behind him and closes off the way. But he makes himself like out of this cave, out of this crazy process, has no idea how to explain it, suddenly feels, more in tune with the Force as his character is now, a consular. And he gets back to the edge of the cave where everybody was, and he sees where that body was that he found initially. And it's just a pile of bones, and there's some robes, on it. So he kind of picks up the robes and he puts them on, and he sees like a pike next to him, kind of like a weapon. And he picks that up too, and there's a little vial of green liquid, and he picks that up. And those were some of the items that I gave him as being, now he's a Jedi. So I gave him, specific robes for him. I gave him a weapon to actually use in kind of melee combat, because eventually he'll end up getting some kind of lightsaber. But for now, he needs a weapon to, fulfill that. And then he also gained this cool little vial that I came up with, which is a potential resurrect. Now, that's really weird in it's first of all, it's hard to die in Star Wars. You have to go down, then you have to get hit several times in order to die. It's not like you just go unconscious and then, in D&D you make saving throws from death, and eventually you'll die from that. So it's not like that in Star Wars. You have to actually get hit several times when you're down to get auto crit, and then your crits roll up to basic death. But it can be pretty easy if you're getting crit a lot. You're getting that modifier up really high. So it's hard for them to die, but I did give him something just in case, and it's a very RNG dependent. And I called it as I pull it up here on my other monitor, the Healing Waters of Dathomir, because it is some of that liquid in a little vial. And it's once per session, right? So it's interesting because he can only do it once. But once per session, he may spend 3 destiny points, which are something you don't want to be spending or holding on to like that. But if they happen to have 3, he can spend them to attempt to revive someone who has gone down and has died within a very short amount of time. But he must make a formidable, which is a very, very hard medicine check, but it's something his character is good at. And if successful, the ally becomes conscious with 1 health left, 1 wound threshold left from going down again. And the check is upgraded by 1 for every turn that passes while that ally is down. So if it's in the middle of combat, any turn that passes while that ally is down is turning one of those purple dice into a red dice, which is something you don't want. But it is kind of a cool little item. It has limited uses on it, and it just gives them an option for potentially resurrecting someone if they go down. So Doc has that now. And he also has just a basic like pike and just robe set. Yeah, that was what happened so far in Dathomir, and that is kind of how the story of how Doc has become now a consular. And hopefully you guys have learned from that. You know, there is a cool way to change a character into a new class, and there's narrative ways to do it. And I felt like that was a really fun thing because that was all a solo session with me and Doc and me and Six Pounder. Like we ended that night when he entered that cave and everything slowed down. And then a couple of days later, him and I played that solo session and went through all that. And it took about 2 hours for him to get all that down. And then all of his XP was relegated again so he can re-spend that on his new class and everything. And he did it. And he's enjoying it a lot thus far. And I think this is the most fun he's had with this character. He's starting to kind of get in the hang of it, but he's still keeping that derpy, kind of clumsy thing up with his character. We have gotten so far through half of the Dathomir story. You could see why it took several weeks to get through, and we will finish it off in another episode. This one's getting pretty long, so I'll wrap this one up. But I'll be sure to do the other one fairly soon because we're done with Dathomir and we're on to the next thing. And the players are really excited for that. But we're kind of getting closer to the end of our first episode, episode 1 of our little story. And when we start episode 2 will be when the series itself starts. So we're getting there. I'm excited for it. I'm excited to see kind of what you guys think about the next bit of Dathomir and how it all pertains to like visions that Doc had and everything. It's really cool. It was really fun to make. And I'm excited to see what you guys think. If you have any questions, leave them in the comments below. I'm happy to answer any GM questions because, we're all still learning how to be better GMs, right? Especially if you're new at it. And, also happy to answer any questions about the Star Wars, RPG stuff because it's a different system than D&D, and that's for sure, but I really do enjoy it. So with all of that being said, we shall see you guys next time.